Kids can be a lot. They take up a lot of our time, our energy, our emotional energy.
Yeah.
Careers take off. There's a lot of things that drive people from intimate marriages to roommates.
Yeah, because you can be together but not be connected.
Yes.
And I think that that's where a lot of this comes into, is that marriages, like all relations, go through different seasons and you go through different phases, and connection can fade. I think a lot of times, like, women just want to feel safe and secure. It's one of the mega needs for women. And so oftentimes it's having that emotional connection and feeling emotionally safe with their spouse.
I am very intentionally affectionate with our kids. I want to make sure that they know 100% that their daddy loves them, their daddy values them, that I am always there. Imagine if that's the way we treated our spouse, the way we treat our kids. Imagine how they would feel.
Your blended family has a 100% chance of success when you do it God's way. We are Blended Kingdom Families, and we want to provide biblical resources to heal and restore families with a message of hope for the next generation.
Hey guys, this video is a little bit more intimate in nature. So if you have kids that are listening, you may want to maybe turn this off and turn it back on a little bit later when you and your spouse are alone. But we're going to have a lot of fun today and get into it.
Yes, stay tuned. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Blended Kingdom Families podcast. We are so excited to be with you today, and we are going to be diving into an amazing topic about rekindling connection in your marriage and rediscovering love, communication, and intimacy, which I think everybody goes through at some point in their marriage. But if this is your first time listening, or you've been listening for a while, we just want to invite you to like, subscribe, share, and comment, leave a review, and send us in your podcast topic ideas. You guys, we would love to address any questions or any topic ideas that you have.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question.
Okay.
What is your love language?
You know, we took the test, and mine was acts of service.
Yeah.
But you seem to think that my love language is words of affirmation.
I think it's a little
definitely
all
not
of them.
touch.
It's definitely not touch. That's why you got to hold my hand right now. So mine is
Touch.
physical affection. So I think it's crazy how God puts people together. So, and again, we're all a little different, and we all have our quirky little things, as you probably know about your spouse at this point. But really, the purpose of this podcast is to be real about the way the marriage evolution goes. We know that kids are what is the acronym for kids? Killing intimacy daily, and something about the S. But anyway, kids can be a lot. They take up a lot of our time, our energy, our emotional energy.
Yeah.
Careers take off. There's a lot of things that drive people from intimate marriages to roommates and back, and therefore and back. And when I say intimate relations, I'm not just talking about physical intimacy. I'm talking about emotional intimacy, all the different levels of intimacy that are really important in the way God designed marriage. But we understand that sometimes people they use the term grow apart. And I don't want to say that in the sense of saying you should become divorced. It's when you feel yourself apart, you've got to be intentional about coming back together.
Yeah, because you can be together but not be connected.
Yes.
And I think that that's where a lot of this comes into, is that marriages, like all relations, go through different seasons, and you go through different phases, and connection can fade. So you know, I know for us personally, we've experienced that where I'm like, hey, I'm not feeling very connected from you. And life gets busy, right? Your careers start taking off. Your business takes off. Your kids are in all of these sports. You're shuffling in and out of the house, and kind of like, you know, the saying term, ships passing in the night or whatever.
Yeah.
But so that connectivity phase, and that's where we have to be intentional about our time with our spouse, you know, and as it relates to your family, intentional time with your children. And the importance of, I think, emotional intimacy, because I think when you feel emotionally connected, that also plays into your physical intimacy, but also spiritual intimacy. You know, we've heard that and I think this can be seen a lot, especially with women, is that when we feel more spiritually connected to our husband, that physical intimacy is there, and emotional intimacy. And so, you know, I think emotional intimacy is one of the foundations for marriage.
Yeah, and please don't just think of emotional intimacy in the sense of it's important to the wife.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make is understanding that men are very emotional creatures.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We are designed that way. We are conditioned to hide that. But I do believe in a truly connected marriage, emotional intimacy for men is just as important as physical intimacy. I just believe that's one of the problems. Again, it's this masculine type toxicity that says men can't be emotional. You know, from being married to me, I'm a very emotional person. I'm probably more emotional sometimes than you are.
Definitely.
And I'm sensitive, and that's one of the things we had to learn about our marriage as we grew together.
Yeah.
But I feel that I feel more in those moments of anxiety. It's more because I'm detached emotionally, and I don't feel like sometimes that understand that what I'm going through emotionally.
Right.
And that's really difficult for me. And that affects me in physical intimacy. That makes me not want to be physically intimate. It's, I need that. So don't discount your husband of saying, well, he just needs sex and then he'll be just fine.
Yeah.
That's shortchanging him and the way God created him.
No, I agree. And, it's not just about, I think when we hear the word intimacy, we automatically, I think everybody thinks of sexual intimacy. But again, I think it begins with emotional intimacy because it's not just about physical attraction or, the physical pleasure of things. But it's understanding trust and vulnerability and that secure attachment and those things that we've talked about before. We've talked about that in any relationship, especially in your marriage. Like the two things that you need are secure attachment and authenticity. And so being able to feel safe and have that foundation of trust and being able to be vulnerable and transparent and be your authentic self with your spouse, all of that plays into rekindling any connection in your marriage that has been lost and building up that emotional intimacy, also spiritual intimacy. This is something that I think a lot of spouses really struggle with because it's like, yes, I have my personal walk with the Lord and my spouse has their walk with the Lord, but there's also a walk that you have together. And whether that's coming together to pray, we talk about that a lot, you guys. But also, that's where you're both spurring one another on and going to church together, taking your family to church, getting involved in a life group, and both seeking out godly counsel or whatever that looks like for you and your spouse and your family in that season. But taking those steps again to build up that foundation if you're feeling disconnect between your spouse.
You're absolutely right. And the statistic that I love the most is that study that basically said, only 1 in 152 couples studied, only one who prayed every day together divorced.
Yeah.
And there's a reason behind that. The emotional connection that you have is directly in line with what God created when you created a covenant marriage. That is the direct line between him, you, and your spouse.
Yeah.
The physical side of it is the enjoyment side.
Yeah.
It's the procreation side.
Yeah.
But we as couples need to understand, and as married couples, we are on a journey together.
Yeah.
And yes, there are going to be times when we drift apart, and there are going to be times when we feel more connected and less connected. And those are opportunities not to say my spouse is wrong or incorrect. It's the opportunity to say there's something that is not right and I need to make a pivot shift.
Yeah.
I need to shift. If my spouse says, I don't feel connected to you, that is not a opportunity to say, well, if you would just do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
If your wife comes to you and says, I don't feel connected, and you say, well, if you would just, get naked and jump in the bed, we'd be connected. That's not the answer that is truly the answer. It is the alarm bell that says, hey, I probably need to maybe disconnect from technology, or I need to sit down, or maybe my wife and I need to go on a trip together. We need to disconnect from the busyness and make sure that whatever her needs are or his are being met so that we can be connected. These are all the fundamental steps that you need to have, whether you've been married a year or 20 years, to make sure that your blended family is thriving and that you're enjoying that.
No, I agree. One of the stats that is here by the Gottman Institute says studies show that couples who engage in deep, meaningful conversations at least 3 times a week are 40% more likely to report higher satisfaction in their marriage. And going back to the importance of emotional intimacy, communication it's like the heartbeat of a marriage, next to your relationship with Christ, but it is like the vascular system of a marriage. Like without communication, you have no idea what's going on. And so when we talk about the marriage meetings, setting weekly time to sit down with your spouse, we do it daily. And honestly, it's our favorite part of the day. And the boys try to come in the bedroom or the office, wherever we're at, and we're like, get out, we're talking.
Yeah.
And we love that. And so I think, communication is key into rekindling connection. And so one, we talked about the importance of emotional intimacy, but what plays into that emotional intimacy is two, communication. And so if you're, again, experiencing that not like loss, but you're needing to rediscover that love and rekindle that passion in your marriage, what is your communication look like right now? Are y'all talking daily? Are you even talking once? What are you talking about? Are you even talking? Yeah. It says that poor communication is the leading cause of disconnection in marriages. So without regular, healthy communication, small issues can obviously snowball into bigger issues.
Well, and I want to point something out too. Texting is not communicating, not in marriage. So I find more couples who will be in these phases of like, all they do is text each other these long paragraphs. And when I tell them, like, that's not communicating. Communicating is acknowledging the importance and the accepting the responsibility that your message is being received correctly. You cannot do that via text. And we live in a world that is so connected via technology. And we need to do a hard rejection of that, especially in marriage. And I think, again, the more I kind of come into this day and age and the more people tend to try to tell me what the expectations of marriage are, the more I push back on them and say that is failing and we need to start rejecting some concepts that people tell you is good. Texting is not communicating. Finding time by yourself is extraordinarily important. And no, your kids are not more important than that time. I know you just said, our boys try to come in sometimes. Now they're getting to the point they're like, they walk in and they see us talking and they're like, okay, I'm leaving. Because they have been conditioned and told when mom and dad are talking, you don't come in. This is our time and we want to make sure.
Yeah.
And the intentionality behind that is kind of that bumper to make sure that we stay on that road.
I think when it comes to text messaging, I think it's more of like you're just letting somebody, it is a form of communication, but it is not a healthy or good form of communication. Meaningful. One thing that we do with our coaching, especially when it's we're working with marriages, is that oftentimes one spouse can be speaking something, but the other spouse is internalizing it, something completely different, and not taking it for what the person is saying, meaning they are not receiving and hearing what their spouse is saying. And so one exercise that we've done is you literally take both spouses, you face them knee to knee, and you make one spouse repeat back what they were saying and what they mean. And it's so interesting to me because oftentimes it is not even like what they're saying. And so it's not even receiving the message of how they're meaning it to come across. And so I think I thought about that whenever you were talking about that, because that's where you need to be able to sit down, look face to face, when you can see mannerisms, when you can feel, I can oftentimes, because we've been married for so long, like I can feel, and even like your energy, I'm like, oh, like you feel really heavy today. Like I can feel the heaviness on you. Or if you're like really anxious or like you had a bad day, like I can feel that off of you. And so I think that's why it's so important to have those face-to-face conversations and really be listening and be able to speak back. Okay, Scott, so what I hear you saying is that you're not ignoring me. You've just been really busy at work and you're really tired. And this has in turn not allowed you to whatever. You get what I'm saying? But I think being able to speak that back is good.
Yeah, I think that's great if you can remember to do that. It's the hard part about it is when we feel rejection, we project rejection.
Yeah.
And that's the hardest part. And again, conflict and when you're disconnected makes everything twice as bad.
Yeah.
So it's not only you disconnected, then all of a sudden the presence of conflict, which is automatically going to be present when you're disconnected.
Yeah.
Then you find yourself in this snowball effect of like it was already bad and it's getting worse. And there's a moment, and I think this is just something really between you and I, is we are not a marriage without conflict. We've had arguments, we've had fights, we've gotten into dark places. The difference is there's always a moment where we stop and we just say, okay, we're going to come back together and express that we love each other, that we're going to work through this, then we talk through this. So it's always the connector piece that comes back. That's how we solve conflict.
Yeah.
But we want to make sure that there's always connection before we try to start solving the conflict. Solving conflict in the middle of disconnection is very, very difficult.
Yeah,
and I find that in couples counseling is they'll come in and they're so disconnected and they're trying to solve problems. And my word to them always first is, I want you to go home and for the next 7 days, I want you to pray together. It's amazing to me, couples who won't do that. And I ask them, you're coming in for counseling, you're paying money to be here, and I'm giving you a very, very simple tool to create connection so that we can solve conflict. And it does not equate to one of those things. Now, I will say the couples who do that come back the next session and they're much happier.
Yeah.
And they're finding that their problems are starting to diminish and they're starting to understand how to talk to each other.
Yeah.
It's because I'm telling them to go rekindle a spiritual connection
Yeah.
and then start working on problems.
No, that's good.
So regular date nights, these are all good things. Taking trips together. I think that's one of the things that Vanessa and I want to do a lot more this year is take some trips together,
we
kind
do.
of get away.
That's right.
Do some fun stuff. Enjoy it.
Well, and it's date nights, you guys. Like date nights do not fix everything. But they are. It is important that you are taking that intentional time and quality time. You know, we talk about disconnecting to connect. Like when you are on your date night or you're spending quality time with your spouse, like put the phone away, put the distractions away, really make that time about one another. It says here that couples who have regular date nights are 20% more likely to report a higher level of relationship satisfaction.
Yeah.
And
flirt with each other. I mean, I think the idea of date night is, and the idea of connection is remember to go back to maybe why you started. It's the idea of like compliment each other, be open to just being, in that moment of saying, I'm with a pretty girl and I want, to make sure she likes me. And I just think that if more people understood that that's the reason you started is going to be the reason you keep going.
Yeah.
And so I think that date night can be a lot more than just, let's go out to dinner. And we've been guilty of this.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go out to dinner, let's eat, let's go home. Versus the time where we kind of shift minds and be like, okay, I want to make sure that my spouse knows that I'm into them. And
so you take her to Home Goods.
Yeah, Home Goods, or you go, shoot guns at the range or something, masculine like that. But also, we've talked a lot about the different types. I want to talk about physical intimacy because, again, very important concept that I want to acknowledge first before I talk about physical intimacy. I know most of our audience is not the spring chickens. We're not talking to a bunch of 20-year-olds. A lot of our audience is older in years, and physical intimacy can be challenging because of our physical bodies. And so I want to be really sensitive to this population that may be saying, hey, my body is changing. Yeah. I don't feel like having sex. And that's not just with women, that's with men too.
Yeah.
But I also want you to push through some of these uncomfortableness and say, hey, listen, but it's still important.
Yeah.
And it's not always about, this idea of what society tells us sex is supposed to be. Physical intimacy can be a lot of different things, and it can be in a lot of different forms. So it doesn't have to be this idea that you think like you're 21 or something. But I do want to say that if you haven't had sex in a long time, that's not a good. That's a problem. And you need to kind of either forcefully kind of go through that or talk through that to the point where you can experience and enjoy that more.
I think it's so beautiful too how God has created our bodies that way and, put, different things within us, whether that's hormones or different body parts that, like, when there's stimulation, there can be so much pleasure, but in that, you guys, there's a natural bonding. There's a physical bonding. There's an emotional bonding. And it's beautiful.
Yeah. Well, and I will say too, again, I acknowledge that women and men view sex differently, and
Sure.
it does different things to each one of them.
Yeah.
One of the more common sayings is that, women need connection to have sex, men need sex to have connection.
Yeah.
And I do think there's some truth in that, is if you're feeling disconnected and you haven't had sex in a long time, that may be one of those things like, hey, let me initiate this so that maybe my husband feels more connected to me, so that he can release more connection emotionally. I think there's a lot of people think when they're in these conflicts, they separate this, and the more they get separated, the further they get apart.
Yeah.
And versus if they acknowledge, one, that men and women are made differently and that God made them differently, and there's nothing wrong with them, they're just made differently, and that men may need sex more and to feel that connection. And it may be part of like, okay, I need to do this so that we have connection.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not a woman, so I don't 100% understand everything about the way the woman views intimacy. I know that it's enjoyable, but I also know there's a lot of factors that go into that. And then, especially as you get older in age, sex drive sometimes decreases.
Yeah.
Sometimes it decreases in men and increases in women. So these are things, again, communication, saying, hey, listen, can we have an open communication about sex? Can we talk about this? I seem to want it more, you seem to want it less, or you seem to want it more, and I don't want to disappoint you, but I don't quite feel as into it. Maybe work's crazy right now. These are things that you need to stay connected and talk about.
I love this quote by Dr. Laura Berman. She says, intimacy is not just about sex. It's about feeling safe enough to be vulnerable with each other, knowing your needs and desires are valued. And so, kind of going back to what you were saying, Scott, about like women's views, I think a lot of times like women just want to feel safe and secure. It's one of the mega needs for women. And so oftentimes it's having that emotional connection and feeling emotionally safe with their spouse. And this isn't just women, it is men too as well, like we talked about earlier. But I think that plays a huge part in it. And just even, we're talking a lot about physical intimacy or sexual intimacy, but even just physical touch, like that in itself, there's biochemistry in just physical touch, or like when somebody like, touches your arm like that. Like
I felt that.
Yeah, like what it does.
I feel better.
You feel better already.
I feel it.
Yeah, and sometimes you just need that external spark to get the engine going. It's like you need something to get the car going again, and
we're old cars.
We're not old.
We're 40. I'm 48. I'm a 48-year-old car.
Okay, I'm not old.
I know somebody listening understands the 48-year-old car. But yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, and the Gottman Institute, again, they have some great stats.
Yeah.
The stat says couples who prioritize physical affection, such as holding hands or hugging regularly, report feeling 30% closer emotionally. So this is your cue. Give your spouse a hug every morning. Just give them a big hug. Give them a big kiss. Tell them you love them.
Pat their butt. Tell them they're pretty.
Yeah.
These are things you got to do.
Yeah.
Guys, we're trying to enjoy marriage, and we want to encourage you to enjoy marriage too. So when we talk about connection, that's why we are married, to be connected. And I just want to draw the parallel between the way we treat our spouse to the way we treat our children. Let me just say this for a second. I am very intentionally affectionate with our kids. I want to make sure that they know 100% that their daddy loves them, that their daddy values them, that I am always there. Imagine if that's the way we treated our spouse, the way we treat our kids. Imagine how they would feel, because I don't think that we put them on equal planes.
Or imagine how much you serve your child if you served your spouse. Obviously, the service is different, but...
Or how much we forgive our children and then serve them versus how we view our spouse without that forgiveness. We can have our kid do something really bad and be like, okay, I forgive you. And the next moment, I'm loving on them. Versus our spouse, we tend to... Y'all see where we're throwing down. That may be another podcast.
Yeah.
But connection is something that we really want to value this year. And we want to make sure that you're valuing. And ultimately, one of those things that you're putting into your marriage that's intentional every single day.
Yeah.
So, guys, we're excited to be with you right now. We're excited that you've enjoyed this podcast. I love talking about connection with you. Come here, hold my hand again.
Okay.
Physical touch.
Physical touch.
We're both physical touch.
Okay.
Okay. Guys, thank y'all so much for joining us. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Be blessed in all that you do.
Hey friends, so glad you were here with us today, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find more resources from Blended Kingdom Families at blendedkingdomfamilies.com. Join us again next time as we talk about more blended family topics. Be blessed in all that you do, and remember, nothing will be impossible with God.